Morning all. There was an absolutely marathon game yesterday between Magnus Carlsen playing white 2861 against Sergey Karjakin 2780, who's currently ranked 6th in the world and number 2 behind Kramnik as far as Russian players are concerned. So it's a mammoth game, so be prepared, maybe get some coffee, take this video in bits if needed, but I think it'll be interesting to see the game from the start. Okay, let's get ready. Knight f3 for Magnus. He's content to get virtually nothing from the opening by playing a King's Engine attack position. Against someone like Sergey, he can choose any setup he wants against this. And the setup he chooses looks extremely solid. He basically puts the bishop outside the pawn chain and creates a structure in the centre designed against the bishop. So we see this here. Bishop g4. Now this moves c4. Black doesn't want to damage his structure and give white some dynamic pressure. He just keeps it very solid, this solid triangle presented against this bishop. So not much from the opening to speak of. Knight bd7, and we see a semi-open c file for white and a semi-open e file for black. Queen c2, okay, bishop e7. Knight c3, and now the first little event of the game. Black gives up voluntarily the light square bishop, and he's going to be putting his pawns a little bit on dark squares, and you might think this is positioning a little bit suspect, isn't it, to give up the light square bishop and then put pawns on dark squares where corresponding light square weaknesses after d4. There's the kind of comfort level which is shown already in this position. Of course black's solid and it is gaining space in the centre, but the light squares are going to be important for white, perhaps for a long part of this game, for most of the game now, the light square strategy of white, compared to, okay, black's got the space in the centre and he can try and press down maybe on the e file later. So maybe that's his idea. Knight e4, and we have an exchange of knights. Bishop d2. Okay, now this next move is quite committal as well. a5. Let's see, is black really wanting to gain even more space with a4 later, or is it just designed against white playing b4 to discourage that? Well, if the intention was to discourage it, Magnus is going ahead anyway, it seems, with a3, and he doesn't mind the kind of ceiling move for en passant options here for black playing a4. And black is not too impressed with a4 here anyway. It does weaken a little bit b4, which could be used to exchange off this dark squared bishop. Black actually plays knight d5, which actually rules out bishop b4s. Rook ab1, and again black's not really interested in a4 for maybe slightly different reasons, that it's underminable. b7 could be a target, there could be some pressure exerted. Queen d7. Rook comes to c1, this f rook, rook fe8. So black's enjoying that view of the e file. White's enjoying a little bit of queenside pressure and has the two bishops. Black's got that quite aggressive knight in the centre and is enjoying that space advantage. But slightly, you know, the slight compromise giving white the bishop here seems amply compensated here. It seems black is fine here. Queen c4. Okay, a first threat here on this d pawn, that's protected with knight c7. Okay, now we see the move h4, which is positionally quite interesting. What is h4 about? It does mean maybe the king has some more flexibility to go to h2 later, and some maybe options in the future of bishop g5 or h5. It doesn't seriously weaken white's position with this light square bishop looking after the king. This is afforded by the position. Okay, and black now does commit to a4, so he's slightly weakening this b4 square, which Magnus pounces in with bishop b4. He doesn't mind losing the bishop pair here with this exchange. I think that will favour him, giving him some sort of pressure on the queen side, a little bit more pressure on the queen side. Black now just plays knight b5, welcoming bishop e7, but Magnus doesn't want to take on e7 either. He just plays king g2, and now we see h6. Okay, slightly improving the position perhaps, with h6 giving the king a pigeonhole in the future. Bishop c5. There's no direct threat at the moment, but it does afford a battery. Maybe queen b4. Queen is eyeing a4, tying down the rook maybe. So it's some subtle little intricacies, trying to get a tiny advantage here. g6. Both sides seemingly with these weakening pawn moves on the king side, but there's nothing over here. The action is like the resources are over here and over here. So playing these pawn moves, there's no real punishment here. Black's main liability is this d4, which he's got protected by the lovely knight on b5. So the point of the pawn on a4, this knight is actually dislodgeable to a4. So that might be the major point here of a pawn here. d4 is supported, giving black a seemingly comfortable space advantage, but the semi-open e file is not really a problem with this bishop on f3. That light square bishop is taking care of things. Queen b4. Okay, this little battery. Bishop f6, supporting d4 even more. Queen comes back. King g7. So both sides mirroring each other here. These cozy bishops next to the king. Both sides complimenting each other's play, in effect, saying it's okay to do this in this position. Rook c4, feigns pressure, a4 and d4. Okay, the rook is tied down. Rook a6, queen d1, and this gives some interesting options, like exerting more pressure on this diagonal with queen h1 later. I know it looks like a ridiculous move, but I was on the live broadcast at Chess Bomb. I saw this on the engine analysis, and I thought, there's no way Magnus is going to play queen h1 later. Surely it's just a computer conception, this idea of queen h1. It's ridiculous. But lo and behold, we might see queen h1 later. b6. Black is wanting to kick this bishop into a seemingly defensive position away from his territory and establish pawns on these dark squares. And you might think there's a compromise here, or rather a concession with this kicking that's now occurred, that these pawns are on dark squares and this bishop can see all the way down on that diagonal. So it seems positionally it's quite comfortable for this bishop in particular. Would we say this is the pride of White's position perhaps? This bishop, you might think it's got some opportunities on this diagonal, f4, and targeting h6 as well, and there's potential batteries with queen c1. There's the rook still tied down to a4 as well. And in fact, in this position, White has to be careful, sorry, Black has to be careful about dropping a4. At the moment, tactically, maybe Black was a little bit concerned about that. Knight c7, he's protecting a4. So he's evicted that bishop back, and now protecting a4. And it looks as though, is this going to be a draw? Can Magnus really grind something out from this position? What actually has he got in terms of positional trump cards? And is he any rush to play anything like b3 or b4 when en passant and this a3 pawn is going to be a target? If that's not a break, h5 can be answered even by g5 perhaps. So there's nothing going on here. e3 looks totally unpleasant to play, be liberating this bishop. So where are White's actual breaks, you might think? It's really nothing much to play with at the moment, it would seem. And the rook even releases some of the pressure on a4. We see knight d5. And then we see this kind of computer move I saw in the analysis. A bit surprised to see Max actually played it. So he's putting more pressure on this diagonal. Does it actually mean anything, though? There's no actual light square targets. Or is there? If a bishop later came to c6, that would be quite nasty for a4 perhaps. So preparation needs to be made for this pressure on the diagonal. King g1 releasing the pressure, threatening the knight, protecting the knight. Is it a big deal? Rook c2, queen e6, queen g2. It looks cozy. It does look cozy, and it's looked cozy all throughout the game. This bishop, and now it's with a friendly queen behind it, putting more pressure on the diagonal. But can White actually grind something from this position? Black might not be keen on playing a weakening of c5 here with b5. So what will Black do actively? Will Black just try and sit and hold position? His next move, rook a7, is not committing to anything. Rook e1, as though now maybe a little bit of excitement is brewing. Is there actually a possibility of e3 or e4 here? Rook e7. It looks like prophylaxis against any e3 or e4. That the rook's doubled here, a bit like when Kasparov doubled rooks behind a pawn to try to discourage f5. e4 is being discouraged by these doubling of rooks. Prophylaxis, the doubling of rooks here against d3. d3 will be exposed. So really, is White pretending to play e4? He hasn't got any break with b4 or e4 surely in this position, and this next move shows that. Rook c8, and now a little bit of transitioning into an endgame. Get the queens off, Magnus is saying. Okay, so we have a queenless position. h5, rook b1. Again, are there faint threats of b3 here, or is it really just pretending to play b3? Bit of prophylaxis again. a3 will be a target, ready to be pressurized. So no way b3 surely. King g2, rook a6. And now, actually, we've said no way surely because of a3, or I've said it rather. But no, we see a bit of action now. Who thought this game wasn't going to explode with excitement? At move 39, Magnus now does play the controversial move. Coffee time, I think. Pardon me. Magnus does play the controversial move, b3. I've just said it highlights a3 as a potential weakness. Can this really be the case that it's okay to play this in this position? Well, b6 is a bit of a target as well. It is swapping one target for another. Black did take on b3, so we have these two potential weaknesses being eyed here in this position. Black can't take the rook away from d5. The knight might have c3 though as a hook from d4. Maybe this next move is about that. It's emphasising that knight c3 is a resource for black now. Rook c4. Okay. What is the threat? Well, rook c4 means that maybe a4 can be on the cards protected by this rook. So this rook's still free to kind of pressure b6. Rook d6. Okay. So both sides seemingly happy with their targets on the semi-open files for their opponents. They're happy with this state of equilibrium at the moment. We see king f1, king f8, and now a4, which does kind of fix more against b5 with ab now being possible. Knight c3, a committal move maybe. Okay, and it looks as though this pawn is now threatened. Rook and knight are threatening that pawn. Bishop f4 hitting the rook. Rook e6. And now things really do get exciting now in this game. With this a4 pawn loose, White now plays e3. Now, if d takes, I think we can just take this knight, so that's not palatable. Taking the a pawn, is that going to give White a slight advantage in central pawns, or not? Because is d4 a little bit loose, or is it just protected by that? What is actually going on here? After knight takes a4, we see actually an interesting transaction. Bishop d5, and here it seems rook e8 is ruled out. If rook e8, bishop c6, and we're hitting e8 and a4, and that's already hit by the rook, so that would be perhaps nasty, and there's no rook a8 there. So this next move goes into a pin, deliberately going into bishop d6. Very exciting stuff now. Bishop d6. This has clearly been calculated by Sergey. His next move is very interesting and very forcing, perhaps. b5, very forcing move. Hitting the rook, hitting the bishop. Okay. White takes on e7. He's won the exchange temporarily. Bishop takes e7. But can this really be tolerated if the rook went back and then b4, for example, Is that really tolerable? Because the knight's going to then go back to c3, and isn't black going to have all the play, perhaps? We need to check that in the second pass. So rook c1 might be out of the question. And you might think, well, what's wrong with rook takes b5 as played? Well, rook takes b5. Black now uses the fork, knight b6. So he's winning his exchange back. So after all that, really, we've just got a simplification, basically. Because white cannot play the rook back without losing the bishop. Can't play rook a4, the knight's on that. So he plays e4, so we get a simplification into an opposite coloured bishop and rook ending, single rook each. After knight takes c4, check. Okay, now bishop takes c4. So here we are in an endgame scenario where white's seemingly got a few subtle trump cards here. The black bishop with these dark squares, dark square pawns, isn't as comfortable perhaps as the light square bishop here, and the rook, potentially coordinating on f7, and white potentially has got more potential for getting the king in the position here. It looks as though white has the more comfortable position overall. And with this blockade of the c pawn, it's as though white can potentially create a passed pawn in the centre, at least. Okay, let's see what happened. Rook a7, and we see f4. This is blockaded, and these are kind of freer, 2-to-1 here. Bishop d6, rook e8. So e5 looks to be coming up, and that will give white a more aggressive king perhaps to come into the game. Rook b7, rook a8, bishop e7, king g2. The king is showing an interest in getting into the black position. e5, there's a pathway here for the king. Rook e1, king f2, rook b1, now rook e8, bishop f8. Subtle moves. Rook c8. As though rook c7 now is threatening f7, that has to be parried surely. Bishop e7. Okay. In this position, possibly rook c7 must be answered by king f8 there. So the bishop's shielding that f7 here, and the rook's still free to play over here. Rook a8, check. And the king now is showing again interest in walking on the light squares. Rook b1. If it ever does so though, this pawn can't be left behind, surely. You'd think that rook g1 is tying the king down here from its journey. Bishop d5. Potentially eyeing g2, which could be useful if this pawn really is a liability. Rook e1. King f2. Rook d1. And now we see rook e8. Bishop moves to f8. Bishop c4. What is going on here? Is white getting anything from these moves? Now in this position, at move 67, it's starting to be established that actually it's not as easy as gliding the king on the light squares. We'd leave g3 behind. That's clearly a problem. And there's a magnificent move now from Magnus. I wonder if you can spot it. It seems a very good winning attempt anyway. Engines might not like it. But if you look at the position of the bishops, this bishop's clearly a lot more aggressive than this one. Black is proving he can defend f7 just with the bishop reverberating from e7 to f8. And maybe he's also proved that the king can't really go into town without leaving g3. So does white have any winning chances? Would most of it just offer a draw here and accept, I'm slightly better with this bishop, but I couldn't see a way to break through? There's something about this blockade which is quite magical, that there's a blockade on c5, and there was this potential for this passed pawn here, this 2-to-1 here, except this pawn's kind of restricted by this one. If you think about it, it would be nice to get really 2 against this one for a dangerous passed pawn in the centre, or even other tactical vulnerabilities. This bishop's so tied down, it would be nice to just get a pawn to f6 for check. That would be really dangerous. And then e6, it would be all over. This bishop and rook would be beautifully coordinating. So there's a magnificent move from Magnus in this position, which shows his true class and genius. He's got black in a position where black has hardly any counterplay, but he needs something really extra special, really X-factor in this position at move 67. Can you spot what he played if I give you 10 seconds starting from now? Okay, he plays g4. This is endgame genius of a higher level that I think we're used to in GM games. I think we once saw maybe fantastic double pawn sacrifices in games of Pillsbury, one on Hastings, I remember a game like that. But here we see one pawn sacrifice and then another. h5. Brilliant. What is going on here? Well, the king on f2 can handle these pawns, but can black's king handle these pawns? That's the question. If black dare takes, surely f5 is strong here. Black didn't dare take. If we have a quick look here, and we'll go in the second pass as well, f5 with f6 as a threat looks remarkably dangerous here. If black throws in the token check, king g3, and still faced with this horrible f6, and then maybe e6, that bishop might be pinned there, so there'll be no bishop d6 if the king was on g8. So this looks remarkably dangerous, and in fact Sergey here didn't want to take this second pawn. He plays rook h1. We've got this potential passed pawn now. hg, we're realizing a potential passed pawn. And also here, well, if king takes, rook takes f8. After fg, these pawns are doubled anyway. So we've basically created this passed pawn. We've actually increased the positional advantage here significantly, surely. That even though material down, it's one of those positions again, managed to go a pawn down in such an advantageous way that he's got pawn mobility here. This bishop is just remaining stronger than this bishop. This rook is more aggressive than this rook potentially. It's got things to attack, loose pieces to attack, and this king is also ready to roll, trying to collect g4 now. Will this amount into a win? Is this enough? This next move is also interesting from Magnus. It looks like a rather strange move in that you might think this is the mobile pawn. Why interrupt its progress? But coordination of bishop and rook needs to be factored in. Particularly f7 square will be pretty juicy for a rook. And this next move, rook e6, looks as though it's threatening. Rook f6, rook f7. We see king h8, h6. Black is making evacuation plans. Now a tempo gainer, bishop d5 on the rook. It also facilitates bishop e4 to target g6, like this. Check, king g3, the king's having a nice time. And we're simplifying now. After rook h3 check, black is accepting a forcing sequence where we're going into an opposite coloured bishop and pawn ending, which you might think is drawn. One of a lot of people's generalizations is that bishop and pawn endings, when they're opposite coloured bishops, they're drawn. But factor in pawn mobility here, and it might be a different story. So the forcing sequence after king takes g4, black is virtually forced to take on d3. Okay. Now, in this position, pawn mobility needs to be emphasized. This forcing move might not be at all strong compared to what Magnus played here to recollect the rook with check. He plays instead f5. He wants to get these pawns going a little bit. Rook e3, rook takes g6. King h7. Another forcing move, bishop g8. King h8. We've got mobile pawns here, but also we've got mobile pawns here. Which ones are quicker? if we observe this position, which mobile pawns are quicker? King f4. The king is more aggressive than this king, that's for sure. This pawn's been stopped by the bishop. This pawn's been stopped because the king is on e3. So rook c3 releases potential for d3, but white's mobile pawns are quicker, surely. f6, d3. The king comes to stop d2, c4. So this race, who's going to win this race? Bishop e6. This rook is going to have to get out of the way of that c-pawn though. And there's also now a horrible threat of winning the bishop with rook g8 check. So king h7 against that. Bishop f5. Horrible position for black with these discovery checks. And in fact here, after rook c2, keeping the rook protected, but what else? What else can black do here? It looks quite a troublesome position. You might think the check could be useful. And we need to check that in the second pass. But the check will be releasing control of g7, so maybe just possibly just king f4. Any d2, there's discovery checks to win d2 with rook g2 check against the king. So with this next move, rook c2 is going into a discovery check, rook g2 check, and the bishop's also on c2 here. So rook takes c2. For the first time, Magnus is material up now in this game. And this bishop is cutting out the king from getting to these pawns here. King g5, king d4. It's going to be 2 pawns up, 2 pawns up at move 86 now. Will these pawns win? Bishop b2, the king protects e5, king f4, f7 threatening to queen, it's keeping his 2 pawns up. e6, can this blockade really last? Is it actually a drawing blockade? King g5, king c6, threat, king d7, e7, and the blockade. King f6, king d7, threat, bishop b3 holding on to e6, king e8, threatening, f8. Black's overloaded here. He can't stop the pawns. It's one of those opposite colour bishop scenarios where the pawns are just unstoppable here. The king is far too aggressive. This king is on wrong place. What can black do here? If he moves the bishop, then king e8, surely. If king g7 then e7. He's forcing through the queen. Black's last move was king g7, and white's last move e7. And black has to resign. He's queening. Magnus just ground down a 2780 from a nothing opening, a seemingly nothing middle game, and played this remarkable kind of double pawn sacrifice concept in the endgame, just emphasizing a small positional advantage, or rather, okay, it depends what you want to call it, but the more active bishop and the greater pawn mobility. And he's turned that into 2 pawns up and unstoppable in the opposite colour bishop ending. Fantastic game. 92 moves. I don't think we should do too much analysis, because otherwise the video is going to be ages and ages. Let's try and get to some key tactical moments on this second pass. If you look at the evaluation, White had a small advantage. Just nagging advantage throughout the game. Okay, bishop takes f3. Is that a little bit controversial or not really? With d4, black is doing balancing of the position really. He's got the extra grip on the centre, the extra space. Okay, so there's nothing much going on here. It's about equal from an engine point of view. Nothing much going on. Okay, again, nothing much going on, nothing really to speak of. It wasn't a very tactical game, so overall, I mean, a lot of the content of this game was very, very subtle positional stuff. We get this idea from an engine that Queen H1 is a useful square though here, and it's actually used now, Queen H1. So Magnus is picking on this idea of Queen H1, which we momentarily saw there. So the first threat, Bishop takes D5. Okay. Again, nothing much going on. Although G5 is liked by the engine here, it's a little bit weakening in the long term to play G5. It's prophylaxis against E3. There's no way White wants to play E3 here. His position will just be put in ruins if he plays E3 surely, or E4. Takes Bishop F6, and it's just horrible. No, he wants to keep totally solid. So it's about equal here. I think we might end up going to the double pawn sacrifice position at this rate. B3, was this liked by an engine? Engine's not going to do anything maybe. If B3 doesn't happen, then what is going on in the position? So Rook C4, we did get this very interesting tactical interlude now after Knight C3, which seems okay. Maybe the evaluation technically is going up a little bit for White after this Knight C3 move. So if that was a small mistake, maybe Black didn't have to do anything here. King G7, for example, Rook D7. Could he just shuffle? Could Black just shuffle here? Would it be a draw? It's hard to see how Magnus would have progressed if Black wasn't doing anything. But Black played a little bit actively with Knight C3, going for that A pawn, and it looks quite clever, the whole thing, from Black initially. That Bishop F4, Rook E6. White's only move here, isn't it? E3 is played. Or is it? This Bishop D5 mechanism, would it work without E3? It's difficult for White to play any other kind of waiting move to test that concept actually as well. Everything seems stuck in place here. So E3, putting a little bit of pressure on Black's centre. Knight takes A4. We see the evaluation going technically up here after Knight takes A4. What else was there? It's King G7. Can Black still wait around this structure? Or is this getting dangerous? Bishop C6, protecting A4. Possibly it's getting a little bit dangerous for Black. Okay, but let's go back. So Knight takes A4, which is clarifying the position. This combination, Bishop D6. So the move B5 was played here. Maybe Knight C3 here is interesting to consider. So if taking, for example, taking an exchange sack, and this might be equal. D takes E3 is possible because of E2 here. We have a position which is okay for Black, an exchange sack possibility. In the game, the exchange sack possibility was played a different way. After Bishop D6, Black didn't play Knight C3, Black played B5. And look at that evaluation. So maybe playing the exchange sack totally with a clear conscience, just Knight C3, not playing B5. Knight C3, just going the exchange down, would seem to be technically, from this engine point of view, at this certain depth, 19, would seem to be a little bit better than B5. Maybe this is the first critical mistake, that sometimes you do have to sacrifice the exchange. This position is long-term worse, surely. Easy to say in retrospect from our armchairs, but isn't it long-term a worse position now? Here, after Rook takes B5, Knight B6. Magnus's move is e4 here, and there's also interest from an engine point of view of e takes d4. What is this about, you might think? Losing the bishop? Isn't it bad? Is it really bad to take the bishop here? Probably, yes. This looks as though these pawns are dangerous. That might actually be worth it there. So if that's the case, then ed4, okay, knight c4, don't we have the same as the game though? Or is it subtly different? It's subtly different because, I don't know, actually. It looks dangerous, but maybe Magnus, well, the way Magnus played it is also looking pretty comfortable after e4. White's got just as much advantage, e4, it's fine. He's got the opposite kind of bishop scenario that he wanted, and it's just unpleasant for black. And he said in the post-game interview, he just thought it was going to be unpleasant for black. Playable but unpleasant long term, I think. The impression I had of Magnus's comments about this endgame here, it just looks on the passive side. We've got a nice blockade on c5. This bishop looks more aggressive, and the other things mentioned before. So rook a7, protecting the second rank like that. f4. So white has an advantage, and he can use this to torture black a little bit. e5. If the king ever ventures out, let's check this king venturing out to e4. I just think it's not possible because of rook g1 actually. Or am I mistaken? Okay, rook g1 is not the strongest. Let's have a look at rook g1 here. Rook a7, king f8. Now the king has to come back, king f3. The king is coming back. You see these king f3s, it's coming back. So the way Magnus is playing it, he's playing it very, very cleverly. We're about to see something magnificent in this position. Will the engine pick it up? We're at depth 21. This is the magnificent breakthrough based on pawn mobility. Philidor said the pawns are the soul of chess. Here there's a pawn mobility situation where white can get a little bit of extra pawn mobility. He just needs a double pawn sacrifice to do that. And the engine doesn't like it. Pretty sure it's not going to come up with it. Depth 25, it's not coming up with g4. I mean, even if it's not taken, g takes and then f5 is extra pawn mobility. Visually we can tell pawn mobility here as human beings, and this blockade. We can say, look, there's a blockade on c5. White's got these slightly extra mobile pawns here in the centre. If only things like f5 were possible. If you work on that logic, then how do you get rid of g6 as a defender? You can start thinking about this double pawn sacrifice with g4 and h5. But is there something technically unsound about it? Because at depth 27 it's not coming up with g4. And I think this is just messing around. I don't think this is going to increase any advantage. So if I put another line, is g4 even mentioned other lines? It's not really mentioned. Rook a8, king f3, king e2. It's not mentioned. Depth 23 now. It's not mentioned. So we're witnessing here an X factor move to break down someone ranked 6th in the world, 2780. This is an X factor move which was played. So what is the objection to it? At the moment, engine saying no big deal, no big deal, just take 0. Was that really the case? It's also indicating got to take, because check, king g3, big advantage to white. So taking, is this no big deal? h5, another one, not mentioned. Is it not worthy of mention? Doesn't it just increase pawn mobility from a human perspective? That we're trying to undermine this guy to get f5 in. Why isn't this mentioned? And this does come a concern, because actually I've got a German in the Hearts League where I've been using engine analysis. I think I've got to factor in more pawn mobility sacrifices, related sacrifices, because I wouldn't like to be playing black here after h5. And it's not even mentioned by the engine here. It's visually getting extra pawn mobility. Okay, so what is the objection to this? In the game, Sergey played rook h1, which isn't mentioned now. It's black's move which is not mentioned. So what would really happen if g takes h5? Why is this equal? Let's have a look. Beautiful concept. Spat out by the engine. f5, pawn mobility. Philidor, pawns of the soul of chess. What's happening here technically? h4, let's go with h4. f6, which I thought was so dangerous. Black's going to have to go in with a bishop sack here, because surely king g8 e6. Well, no, yes. King g8 e6 would be crushing. Okay, we can establish that surely. That this is losing for black. If taking, and this is going to be, okay, we can see the evaluation. We can trust white's winning there. But what of this other line, sacrificing the bishop? Really, is this the way to play? To sacrifice the bishop, king g6, to keep equality here? Rook takes f8. Is it these two pawns, which were the side effects of the double pawn sack combination? These two pawns, how dangerous are they? King f5. Let's go with rook h8. Check. I think here the mystery might start to be unravelled. Why this wasn't deemed so good as a winning opportunity. The engine's foreseen this bishop sack and these pawns as a kind of resource, I think, for getting a perpetual check. So check. I think black's on the verge of getting a perpetual check, and that's what saves black. Check, and it's perpetual check time. If the white king tries to come out of it, I think g3 is going to be crushing. The white king can't come out of it. In fact, king f2 is also unplayable because of a g3 check, and that looks all over for white. It's absolutely all over for white. But if king h2 here, g3, king takes h3, the bishop is supporting h5, so no problem with rook h1, and that'll be okay. That'll be good for white. So black just carries on the checks. So that's how black could have technically got a draw. He has to sacrifice the bishop after g takes h5, commit to sacrificing the bishop, and these pawns secure a perpetual check. So in the game we see rook h1, and this could be the massive turning point where white's advantage, I guess, is going to be creeping up. Surely h takes g. We've got the pawn mobility to celebrate. fg, rook e6. Threat is rook f6 and rook f7 as mentioned. Okay, rook h6, bishop d5. Threat is bishop, sorry, taking the rook is the main one. Okay, king. You can see white's advantage has crept up somehow. What's happened? Well, visually we know that the king's getting more aggressive and g4's being collected, so white hasn't even sacrificed anything. It's got a great position. Even if he loses d3 here, these pawns are blasting through with f5. So, okay, and look at the evaluation. It's all good for white. Was even rook takes g6 possible out of interest? No, that might be just about equal here. It's doesn't need to be played. White can get more momentum here from these passed pawns, from playing f5, from these mobile pawns rather, from playing f5. So we take on g6. Bishop goes to g8, pushing the king back awkwardly. King f4. And this looks as though, yeah, the advantage has really crept up there after rook c3. What else was there? It looks like a dire position now. If rook e1, Just move the pawns. F6. Bishop can come back to B3 now, threatening rook G8. Or not. Is there technical resources here? No, I don't think even the trick C4 works. This should be good for white, but it seems okay. It seems that might have been apparently more stubborn resistance technically, but it's a miserable position. And F6 now is huge. We're talking huge evaluation difference now. So D3 we see King E3 stopping the pawn advancing. C4. Bishop E6 is really light from engine. You might think, why is that so accurate? Why not say Bishop D5? I think Bishop D5 is a little riskier because of D2. Let's have a quick look at Bishop D5, because D2 and this tactic here on Rook D3 would be embarrassing, and black might even be equal again. So the bishop doesn't want to go D5. It's a tactical target for D2s and Rook D3. So it goes to E6, which still threatens Rook G8 check without any problem. King H7, and now we see Bishop F5 going in, creating this discovered check resource. And it's pretty dismal for black. It's actually lost here, it seems. It's completely lost. In fact, more incisive than Magnus' move might be E6 here. Just E6. At this depth anyway, E6 looks really dangerous. But the way he played it, there's no problem either. Rook G2 check will do. And it's just a clear win here. Black can't get at these pawns. He's going to be 2 pawns down now. I mean, what else does he do in this position? Because he's threatened now with E6. If this pawn moves or the bishop move, E6, and then King G5, E7, end of game. So he has to prepare against E6 there, with King takes F6 now. So he's going 2 pawns down, and there's no blockade. The king is too aggressive here. It's gliding in on these dark squares finally. It's King G7, E7. Brilliant game in many respects. Just shows that who needs openings? You can just grind down the opponents, even if they're 27-80. So Magnus is in the lead after this. Fantastic. He really is carrying on this reputation. I think everyone's falling in love with him on various sites. His play, he's the Mozart of chess. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.